Gardaí are still checking on information supplied from members of the public in response to Garda appeals for assistance.
Hallmarks of a murder
She went
inquiry,
missing.
but only Gardaí
Families say her disappearance is totally out of character.
This is a story in two parts.
To her family, she never arrived.
Throughout the 1990s, a series of young women vanish without a trace.
The American student Annie McCarrick disappeared.
Someone knows.
That's when scary, and today they claim
Disappearance remains a mystery.
Patricia McCauley with Mary Cummins. Others have found traces of blood in the house.
Now Gardaí believe Deirdre Jacob was killed.
If there is no body, then you have no crime scene.
Leaving their families looking for answers.
It was as if she had disappeared into thin air.
In 3 of the cases, there were very good suspects.
The false alibi hindered the case greatly.
Most of these cases remain unsolved decades later, raising fresh questions about how they were investigated.
What were they appealing for? She was giving them information, but nobody came to get it from her.
Is this a missing case, or is it a murder case?
What else could they have missed?
Today, Gardaí upgraded the Annie McCarrick case to a murder inquiry,
prompting fears that the same killer may have abducted some of these women.
There could be a serial killer roaming Kildare, Dublin, the mountains, dumping their bodies.
Within an area that becomes known as the Vanishing Triangle. It's 1995, and 26-year-old American woman Annie McCarrick has been missing for 2 years.
That student from Long Island in New York went missing.
Annie McCarrick's mother had been due to visit her daughter a few days after she went missing.
Annie was my only child.
Here we are, merry old Ireland. I really don't want to leave, but can't wait to see you at Christmas.
My fondest wish would just be to find out what happened to her.
Hi, Mom.
Oh, Annie. Let's go, Annie.
See you, folks.
Then, in November, another young woman vanishes.
Jojo Dollard was abducted while hitching a lift.
Jojo Dollard disappears from Moon, County Kildare in November 1995.
Claimed she called a friend at around 11:15 p.m. from the Kildare village of Moon. She was having problems hitching a lift, but said she would call when she arrived home.
Fiona Pender from Tullamore, County Offaly, vanishes in August 1996.
At 6 o'clock that morning, she was in her flat at Church Street in the town when her boyfriend left for work.
6 months later, in February 1997, 17-year-old Ciara Breen disappears.
Ciara Breen went missing from her home in Bachelor's Walk in Dundalk.
Like Annie McCarrick, all of the women seem to have vanished without a trace. Then, 2 more women disappear within months of each other.
Fiona Sinnott disappeared in 1998.
A young mother, Fiona Sinnott from Wexford, vanishes in February 1998.
Fiona went out socialising with friends in a pub in Broadway in County Wexford. She then walked home and was last reported seen at her house the next day, but hasn't been seen since.
5 months later, 18-year-old Deirdre Jacob is snatched outside her home near Newbridge in County Kildare.
After visiting a local bank, she was walking towards her home on the outskirts of the town. The Gardaí now say they're concerned about her whereabouts.
The disappearances of these 6 women within a so-called murder triangle stretching from Dundalk in the north to Wexford in the south and across to Tullamore in the Midlands provokes a public outcry.
It actually scares you to think that somebody can actually go missing, and just like that.
It's a mystery anyway, and how it's going to be solved, I do not know. Between 1996 and 1998, there's a noticeable change in people's attitude towards walking streets at night, thumbing lifts and things like that. There was a certain fear and panic felt by the public at large because they thought was there a serial killer out there targeting lone females.
This is quite extraordinary that there could be a serial killer operating in Ireland who is killing women, dumping their bodies.
With no body and no crime scene, the disappearances of all 6 women are officially classified as missing person cases.
At that stage, missing persons cases were treated as a local investigation. It would be then up to the local superintendent to increase the manpower involved in the investigation, or maybe to bring in outside assistance to help with the investigation.
Amid mounting public concern, October 1998, Commissioner Pat Byrne announces the establishment of Operation Trace. For the first time, local investigations into the missing women will be examined by a single national team.
We included 6 missing women, which were Annie McCarrick, Fiona Pender, Georgia Dollard, Fiona Sennett, Ciara Breen, and Deirdre Jacob. The idea was to establish, was there a common link?
The team will also look at the records of people who have shown serious sexual violence against women.
The investigation invariably puts people like that under the microscope.
This man, Assistant Commissioner Tony Hickey, is handpicked to lead the Operation Trace team.
We tried to learn from what was being done in other countries, and at a very early stage, I selected about half a dozen people, an inspector, a couple of sergeants, a couple of detectives. I had known them. They all had pretty good track records. They were all conscientious investigators.
One of those experienced detectives is Alan Bailey.
This was unique in that it was the first operation within the state that was set up specifically to target 6 specific crimes to see if we were dealing with a serial killer. So you come in with a fresh pair of eyes.
We had an open mind when we started. There was research done into the whole background of the victims, and we've looked at geographical profiling.
We also did a system called victimology, as in, did they share a boyfriend, did they share a school and things like that. All these things were pieced together on the basis that if we're looking for a serial killer.
We have no bodies at this stage. We have no crime scene, which is makes it extraordinarily difficult.
With Operation Trace, in many respects, we didn't even have proof that a crime had been committed.
But Operation Trace has no powers to critically examine how local Gardaí initially investigated the cases.
With Operation Trace, we had to be very careful not to give the impression that we were there to criticise the initial investigation.
Codenamed Operation Trace, they would be Gardaí who had not worked on the investigations so that they could take a fresh look at them.
We did find some pushback and to be told that our role wasn't investigative. We found that to be rather frustrating because on the one hand, here we are with an overview of all 6 cases. We felt best placed to comment on them and maybe to highlight aspects of an investigation.
Operation Trace soon expands its remit to include more cases of missing women. The aim is to help build a better profile of a potential killer.
Of necessity, we have broadened it. What we're trying to establish is there something there that we haven't hit on?
We were advised that maybe 6 cases might be enough.
The search has all the hallmarks of a murder inquiry, but all the Gardaí will say officially is that they are treating the disappearance of Phyllis Murphy as that of a missing person.
One of the cases Operation Trace adds to its list stretches back almost 20 years.
Phyllis vanished after leaving the home of her friend near Newbridge.
Phyllis was one of 11. She was very quiet, very sensible girl. She loved life, she loved children. She always said she would love to be a children's nurse.
Phyllis worked in the Curragh knitwear factory. This is on
she worked in a factory in Newbridge as a cutter, and she loved her job. Very loyal person.
She had called here to see her workmate Barbara to arrange to go to a dance later that night. She left the house and walked up to the bus stop.
In 1979, Phyllis Murphy was standing at a bus stop outside the Cadine Hotel in Newbridge.
She didn't get on the 7 o'clock bus as
She was waiting for a bus and she obviously got a lift.
Everyone who knew her makes a point. She would never have taken a lift from a stranger. So it follows whoever gave her a lift that night was known to her.
The body was found just before 12 o'clock today, lying in woodland about 15 feet from the side of the main Hollywood to Turlock Hill Road, about a mile from Wicklow Gap.
A month after Phyllis goes missing, her family get the news they fear most.
She had 25 marks on her body, bruises, where she had been hit. One guard said that the mark of his boot was still in her head where she had been kicked. To think that someone did that to her, that was heartbreaking.
About 2,000 people from throughout the county attended the funeral. The heavy snow, too, had postponed the search for clues to the girl's killer.
Despite the discovery of her body, by 1998, when Operation Trace is established, Phyllis Murphy's murderer remains at large. Could he be the serial killer Trace is looking for? The Operation Trace team soon becomes aware that behind the scenes, this man, Detective Sergeant Brendan McCardle of the Garda Technical Bureau, has been examining potential links between the recent missing women cases and Phyllis Murphy's killing 20 years earlier.
In 1979, when Phyllis Murphy went missing, I was a uniformed guard attached to Naas Station. I was hopeful if I could get a breakthrough in the Phyllis Murphy case, that this may have led to establishing the killer for some of the other cases. I could see commonalities between some of the other disappeared and this case. Deirdre Jacob went missing in Newbridge. Jojo Dollard went missing in Moon. Phyllis Murphy went missing in Newbridge. The three of those locations were in Kildare, which is remarkable.
As a forensic expert, McCardle is also aware that semen samples taken from Phyllis Murphy's body 20 years earlier could in time yield vital clues.
The body had been lying there, we believe, from shortly after she was abducted and was in a perfect state of preservation.
A body, when it's found, can tell a story of what happened to it prior to death and maybe after death. And as a scientist, it's our job to help elaborate that story.
This is Dr. Maureen Smith, an expert in DNA profiling and a colleague of Brendan McCardle's.
He always maintained his interest in the Phyllis Murphy case. It would come up on fairly regular intervals in our conversations as to, is there anything can be done in this case?
As DNA techniques improve, the two forensic experts begin to wonder if they might have a trump card.
There were over 50 preserved blood samples from males that had been taken in the early stages of the investigation. And the possibility now existed that for a DNA profile from the semen swabs of Phyllis Murphy could be compared with the profile from these blood samples.
But to find a match between the semen and blood samples, McCardle will have to deliver them in person to a specialist laboratory in England for examination.
I am travelling through the airport, hopefully to solve a murder. I hold on to this bag, my personal luggage. At no stage did I allow that out of my reach or out of my hand.
But the first batch fails to produce a successful match. He convinces his bosses to allow him bring a second batch over to the UK. Then he gets a call he will never forget.
I was based in Carlingford area at Templetown Beach, and I got a call from the forensic laboratory in the UK, and they told me that they had identified a suspect from the last batch that I had delivered. And they told me his name. I asked them to spell his name, and I wrote it down there and then. John Crerar. I was in shock. This was the killer of Phyllis Murphy after 20 years.
McCardle immediately contacts Operation Trace.
Brendan McCardle rang me and he said there's a hit on the Phyllis Murphy case.
John Crerar, he was one of about 40 or 50 people from whom blood samples were taken.
He lived in the locality. Naturally, we put his whole movements and everything that we could find out about him under a microscope and examined his work records at the time.
But there's a problem. Crerar has a cast iron alibi for the night Phyllis disappeared.
If the science contradicts alibi evidence, well then the alibi warrants further investigation by the Gardaí.
During the initial investigation in 1980, a work colleague told Gardaí that Crerar was at work with him on the evening Phyllis Murphy disappeared. Armed with the new DNA evidence, detectives revisit this alibi witness.
Alibis, they're as good as the weakest link. It was a workmate, not knowing what he had done and not suspecting, that probably thought maybe he had slipped off maybe for a few pints coming up to Christmas.
The man gave the alibi on the basis that he thought John would have lost the job. And unfortunately, for 20 years, that alibi stood firm.
With Crerar's alibi broken, the Operation Trace team moves quickly.
After he left his place of work, he was stopped in his car and was arrested. The one thing he did take with him was a religious statuette, and I saw John here bless himself and pray. And I said to myself, that's the most unusual reaction from a man who has just been arrested for murder.
Nearly a quarter of a century after he raped and strangled Phyllis Murphy, John Crerar is tonight beginning a life sentence for her murder.
After a 4-week trial and with his alibi broken, in October 2002, John Crerar is found guilty.
Convicted by unanimous jury verdict, he always denied the charge and called the compelling DNA evidence absolutely impossible. Kildare Gardaí.
For Phyllis Murphy's family, the realisation she had been killed by someone known to her is shocking.
He was a local man, lived in the town here. We knew him, he knew the family. 2 of my sisters babysat for him.
John Crerar contradicts evidence from a former work colleague.
Only for that man retracted his alibi. That was the reason John Crerar was got. He did the right thing. Even after 20 years. It's important because then the family can rest, that are not looking at everyone, that are not worrying, is it the person that's walking behind him going up to town, was it that person that killed her family?
After Crerar's arrest in July 1999, the disappearances stop. Might he be the missing link Operation Trace is looking for?
On the face of it, Crerar would have to be a serious suspect. He wasn't 100 miles away from what we had thought may have happened to our missing women. Having said that, despite all the investigations that were done and all the background checks and everything else, we didn't acquire any evidence to connect Crerar.
While Crerar is in custody, two men out hunting stumble upon a terrifying scene. What happens next raises even more questions for Tony Hickey and the Operation Trace team.
If Larry Murphy hadn't been caught attempting to kill that woman, the Gardaí would never know about him.
It's February 2000, and Operation Trace has been up and running for almost 18 months.
John Crerar is tonight beginning a life sentence for murder.
Despite some early success assisting in the capture of killer John Crerar, the team is unable to prove any link between him and the other missing women they are investigating. Then, on a Friday evening in February 2000, a woman leaving work in Carlow makes her way towards her car.
She heard somebody behind her, turned around, and it was a man who punched her in the face. She fell backwards into her own car. He pushed her into the footwell. He got her out of the car and into his boot.
He drove through Carlow town with the radio blaring in his car to drown out any possible sound or calls for help.
She saw a child seat in the back of the car. She saw, like, this guy is a father, probably. This guy has kids.
He told her circumstances of his own background, married with children.
Why would he tell me those things if he's going to let me go?
He drove to a wooded area.
And then, having repeatedly raped her, he then took a plastic bag. He tried to strangle her, he tried to kill her, he tried to murder. The woman, terrified, actually tried to get away from the people who were actually her rescuers. They recognised the man who had done this to her. They gave the Gardaí the name Larry Murphy.
Larry, of course, because of the modus operandi he used in the abduction and assault, became a person of interest to the Operation Trace investigation. He ticked a lot of boxes for us, and we went back to school, to work and all that, just to establish a picture of him and see could we connect him to any of our missing persons.
Larry Murphy, he was a jobbing carpenter. He lived in Bolton Glass. He came from a local family there, was well known. He had a wife, 2 children, and earned his living driving around Kildare, North Wicklow.
Larry would have known, I say, an awful lot of the area. Spent a lot of time alone in the woods hunting, and a funny individual to say the least. He would have been considered to be totally antisocial. If he went into a pub, he drank alone and nobody mixed with him, nobody wanted to be party to him. Larry attempted to remove himself from a suggestion that he was somebody who stalked and targeted women. He said it was a random act, that he just happened to be in the car park at the time and just happened to see a lone female. Now, we would say that that's totally at variance with the facts. And we've no doubt that he had selected the victim with care. He never had any criminal convictions.
If Larry Murphy hadn't been caught attempting to kill that woman, the Gardaí would never know about him.
Lawrence Murphy, aged 36, of Woodfield, Bolton Glass, County Wicklow, pleaded guilty in the Central Criminal Court today to 4 charges of raping a woman and 1 charge of attempted murder on February the 11th, 2000. Mr. Murphy collapsed in court after he had pleaded guilty to the first 4 charges.
By the time Larry Murphy is jailed, the Operation Trace team is unable to uncover any connection between him and the other missing women. But he remains a person of interest.
Well, from our point of view, and again it was quite close to where we were operating from, and it was in the region concerned, more or less the centre of what has been called the triangle. And Larry Murphy, on the face of it, no more than John Crerar at the time, and Larry Murphy, from our point of view, you had to look at both of them seriously because of what they had done and what they were capable of, and their modus operandi.
There's no obvious link, and we were saying to ourselves, he ticks a lot of boxes. So he was a person of interest.
By this time, Operation Trace has added the disappearance of another young woman, 22-year-old Imelda Keenan, to its list.
Waterford city centre, 1994. The last time Imelda Keenan was seen was on Lombard Street, close to her William Street flat.
Usually I'm out walking and I meet a terrible lot of people coming at me, looking at me, and I'd be thinking deep down, is that someone that knows something? Is that the person I'm looking for?
Detectives hope they can establish potential links between Imelda's disappearance and the other cases they are investigating. Reviewing the file, Alan Bailey is surprised to learn how her case has been categorised.
It was categorised as a possible suicide. That left the door open that it may not have been, but I'd be afraid that a category like that could colour the approach to it.
But this comes as news to the Keenan family. They say they were not aware of this approach to the case until now. It leaves them wondering if vital clues may have been missed because the case was not immediately investigated as a possible murder.
Imelda would never, ever think of suicide. I don't think Imelda would ever consider that.
It is only now, after 29 years, that Jerry is able to acknowledge publicly for the first time that he believes his sister met a violent death.
Deep down, in my own heart, I think that Imelda was murdered in Waterford. I think Imelda knew her murderer.
The Keenan family are now looking for answers from the Gardaí. They are also requesting that Imelda's case be upgraded to a full murder inquiry.
Is this a missing case or is it a murder case? After 29 years, this has to be the murder case. We want the Gardaí to look into it more for us. Give us peace. I always believe that there is 2 or 3 people here in Waterford City holding back vital information. We want someone to come forward, please, and just take us out of this pain.
By 2001, the Operation Trace team can find no links between Imelda Keenan's disappearance and the other missing women cases. Despite the Keenan family's questions and concerns, An Garda Síochána's response is that the case remains listed as a missing person investigation.
The formal Operation Trace lasted for almost 3 years, and then it was wound down because we felt we couldn't go any further than we had gone. We didn't establish any link between all the cases. We believe that certainly 3 that are what we would consider good suspects.
The 3 cases that we were satisfied that the perpetrator was known to the victim were the disappearance of Fiona Sinnott.
Fiona went out socialising with friends in a pub in County Wexford.
Anyone that knows that, and please come forward. It's a long time now.
Do you think there are people out there that do know?
Yeah.
Ciara Breen.
17-year-old Ciara Breen went missing from her home in Dundalk.
I feel in my heart you will come forward.
And Fiona Pender.
Fiona Pender was last seen in her home at Tullamore on the 23rd of August.
Fiona was my baby, and I need to find her. And she was going to have her own baby as well, and no one needs to find her more than I do.
Operation Trace identifies chief suspects in these 3 missing cases. But when the team disbands in 2001, nobody is charged, in part because the suspects have strong alibis.
There was insufficient evidence to bring a successful prosecution. And simple things like we had no body, so we had no proof of death. The persons whom we suspected of involvement had cast iron alibis.
A serious crime review team, or a so-called cold case unit, has been set up.
After Operation Trace winds down, a new serious crime review team, or cold case unit, is established to investigate unsolved crimes. The cases of Fiona Sinnott and Fiona Pender are upgraded to murder and suspects arrested.
19 years old Fiona Sinnott.
5 people were arrested under Section...
But no charges are brought. Their alibis stand firm.
2 men were released.
Ciara Breen, who was just 17
The man was arrested around 8 o'clock this morning in the Dundalk area.
The chief suspect in the case of Ciara Breen died in 2017. But 3 other cases remain where Gardaí can't rule out possible links.
The 3 cases are that of Annie McCarrick, Jojo Dullard and Deirdre Jacob.
Today, Larry Murphy walked free after...
Larry Murphy was released from prison in 2010, having served 2/3 of a 15-year sentence.
In his sentence, but Murphy did not participate in any of the treatment provided for sex offenders in prison.
In the years that follow, Gardaí continued to treat him as a person of interest in these 3 cases. One of the few people who spoke directly to Larry Murphy about the missing cases is his brother Tom.
I asked him, had he anything to do with the missing women? I wasn't happy with his answers.
Student Annie McCarrick disappeared.
Jojo Dullard
got to Enniskerry, and today they carried
the disappearance remains a
now
mystery.
Gardaí believe Deirdre Jacob was killed the day of her disappearance or soon afterwards.
Gardaí cannot rule out links between the disappearances of 3 young women, Deirdre Jacob, Jojo Dullard and Annie McCarrick. In 2016, the Garda Cold Case Unit completes a review of the Deirdre Jacob case and makes recommendations to Kildare Gardaí.
The family of Deirdre Jacob have welcomed today's development in which Gardaí have...
In August 2018, Gardaí reclassified the missing case of Deirdre Jacob to a full murder inquiry.
Well, it does change everything, because we've always had hope that Deirdre would come back and that we would see her again and all that. And it has changed all that, and it's very difficult to hear that.
We will always have a lot of questions to ask, you know, what happened to Deirdre, why did it happen, you know, and all that. So we're never going to get closure on that, but we will know somewhat more of what happened, and that's what we're striving for.
The upgrade is on foot of what officers call substantial and significant new information.
The upgrade meant that a team of detectives just pored over the whole file, everything that was in it, you know, reappraising witness statements, the evidence, all of the CCTV footage that was taken. Larry Murphy was the subject of an investigation into Deirdre Jacob's murder.
In 2011, shortly before I was due to retire from the Garda Síochána, at a stage when I was in the cold case unit, I was directed to go to Midland Prison to speak to a prisoner there who wanted to talk to the Gardaí. Myself and another guard went to the prison, where we met a prisoner who told us that in his cell, Larry Murphy admitted to him that he had abducted and killed Deirdre Jacob. He said to me, she should stand on the side of the road. He struck her, dragged her into his car, drove away, and then killed her after that. He actually made a written statement containing that allegation. Whilst I can never say for definite that he's telling the truth, I can say that he presented it at all times as genuine and believing what he's telling us. If you look at it in one sense, he had quite a lot to lose, because if the word got out in the prison that he was an informer and he's wearing an informant's jacket, he was going to have a hard time with it in the prison.
But this prisoner's statement on its own is unlikely to be enough to convince the Director of Public Prosecutions to charge Larry Murphy. Detectives believe they need more.
The Jacob family have spent 20 years hoping for a breakthrough.
Using new techniques, they enhance CCTV footage which identifies a man resembling Larry Murphy in Newbridge Post Office around the time Deirdre Jacob was there.
Gardaí now intend to revisit each witness and aspect of the investigation.
Then, in 2019, a witness comes forward with significant new information.
This witness was driving a Jeep on the day that Deirdre disappeared, around 2:30, 3-ish, that sort of time. And this witness told Gardaí that he was driving along towards Newbridge. A car was coming towards him, and from his position in the Jeep slightly higher up, he saw a person in the footwell of the passenger seat, kind of half in the footwell, and this person was either laughing or crying. So Gardaí now have 3 key pieces of evidence. They have the CCTV footage, they have the prisoner, and they have the Jeep driver.
Investigators are confident that they now have enough evidence for a prosecution.
The file that went to the DPP was the first file to go to the DPP on Larry Murphy in relation to any of the missing women.
But after reviewing the evidence, in July 2022, the Director of Public Prosecutions decides not to charge Larry Murphy.
I'm disappointed that the DPP decided not to prosecute Larry for the abduction and murder of Deirdre Jacob. But at a level, as an investigator, knowing what's required in a court of law, I suppose I wasn't that surprised.
Gardaí still regard Larry Murphy as a strong suspect, and they're continuing to investigate him.
Larry Murphy's estranged brother Tom is not surprised that Larry is a person of interest to the Gardaí. He is shocked by his brother's previous conviction for abduction, rape and attempted murder.
It seems like something that was well practiced, and he had done it before. He was working in Swiss pub in Newbridge when Deirdre Jacob went missing. He lived about 2 miles from Moon, where Jojo Dollard went missing, and I'm suspicious of it.
25 years after Jojo Dollard disappeared without a trace, the Gardaí today announced they had officially upgraded the case to a murder investigation.
We have known in our hearts and have accepted that Jojo's not alive, and we are hopeful that the team will be able to move this case along further and maybe, please God, find answers to our questions.
Josephine Dollard is now 6 days missing. From early morning, Gardaí were active throughout 3 counties.
Jojo Dollard, she was last seen in Moon in a phone box. She was ringing her friend, and she cut short the phone call, telling her friend, "Oh, I've just got a lift." So the assumption was that she got into a car with somebody.
The massive search got underway.
The person who gave her a lift has never been traced, and Jojo was never seen again. What changed then, though, was that Larry Murphy was now a suspect for the murder of Deirdre Jacob, which was a few kilometres down the road from where Jojo Dollard was last seen as well.
Today, Larry Murphy's name remains on the Garda file as one of a number of persons of interest in the Jojo Dollard case.
He is now a free man. Larry Murphy has never been charged, so he can never be compelled to talk to Gardaí. The evidence against him is circumstantial. It's not hard evidence enough to get a prosecution.
Last time I saw Larry was in 2005 in Arbor Hill Prison. I asked him, had he anything to do with the missing women? I wasn't happy with his answers. I wasn't at all happy with them. I didn't get any answers. I never want to see him again. I can't begin to comprehend the suffering these families are going through. They get up in the morning to a house, their daughter's not there. They're sitting watching the front door to open for her to walk in. I have a daughter myself. I can't begin to imagine what it's like. I just can't.
To date, Gardaí have no evidence to link Larry Murphy with the disappearance and murder of Jojo Dullard. The new lines of inquiry, prompted by the upgrade of the Dullard and Jacob cases to full murder investigations, leave Annie McCarrick's family hopeful.
This morning I am making a public appeal for information. I want to speak to any person who had any interaction with Annie McCarrick on the 26th of March 1993.
In March of this year, 2 days before the 30th anniversary of Annie's disappearance, the Garda Commissioner agrees to Nancy McCarrick's written request for an upgrade to the case.
There is a person or persons who have information who haven't yet spoken to Gardaí.
It now has all the resources and powers of a full murder inquiry.
Our great hope at this point in time that it might shine a new light. You never know, it might prompt someone to come forward after all these years.
Gardaí cannot rule out a possible link between the cases of Annie McCarrick, Jojo Dullard and Deirdre Jacob. But they need evidence to connect them. An international group of scientists working on their own initiative believe they may be able to help.
It has all the hallmarks, all the earmarks of a serial killer. I mean, whoever did this planned it well, organized it well, executed it well. If there's no evidence left behind, this person took great pains to set this whole thing up.
Ken Strange is a former FBI agent and friend of the McCarrick family.
Nancy, I want to introduce you to some of the most wonderful people in the world. They've come out today from far and wide.
I've hitched my wagon to this group of scientists. We had two college professors. One was a geophysicist, the other was an expert in taphonomy, and then we had a world-famous cadaver dog handler as part of the group.
Based on years of independent research into the Vanishing Triangle, this group has identified a site in County Wicklow, which they say has a hidden underground chamber. They believe this could be the burial place for the missing women. They are seeking the help of the Gardaí to search the site. An Garda Síochána says it does not comment in advance on specific sites that may or may not be the subject of forensic search as part of ongoing investigations.
The Gardaí, they're not turning over stones when they don't need to do that, and that's fine. But the other thing, and this worries me a little bit, is are they employing other tools, forensic tools, scientific tools, without direct evidence, such as a ground radar to search for bodies, drones? Are they enlisting subject matter experts from other countries, other police forces, such as the FBI?
There isn't a real thing called a vanishing triangle into which women step and some of them will disappear and vanish without trace. But what is very real is that women vanished without trace and their bodies have never been found. This is quite extraordinary.
I have two words that I've been using over and over again, and that's someone knows.
Someone knows something.
Do you ever
I don't really want justice. I want to put her into a grave, into a final place.
For 3 decades now, families of the missing women lost within a murder triangle have tirelessly appealed for information.
Jojo was 21 when she
We
went missing.
are very concerned about Jojo. Please let her go.
Fiona Pender was last seen.
Fiona was my baby, and I need to find her.
They believe that someone out there is hiding the truth, allowing a killer to walk free.
Fiona Sinnott disappeared in County
Somebody
Wexford.
knows where Fiona is, but we don't.
And 17-year-old Ciara Breen went
If she is lying out there, please don't leave her lying out there.
Deirdre Jacob was last seen in the town.
There's at least one person who knows what's happened to Deirdre and where she is, and we're begging and asking people out there to help us.
The families have fought tooth and nail to have it highlighted, to have it investigated, and I'd say don't stop. Alibi is given through loyalty, friendship, fear, that over the period, over the passage of time, that all those things change. And if I might be afraid of you today, maybe a few years' time, you're not the threat I thought you were, or maybe you're not the lover I thought you were. And these loyalties do change.